Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, the purveyor of passionate crime, Jared Hornbeck, and I'm coming to you from Brooklyn, New York. But I am not scouring this Italian castle looking for that $1 million check by myself. No, I am not. Who is here with me?
Well, it is I, Steve Guntley, this podcast's very own goody two shoes. And this is the podcast about crystal balls, VJs, and of course, lion chairs. And that's because this is the podcast about Spellcaster, a magical horror flick starring quintessential 80s new wave icon Adam Ant. And starring is used with heavy parentheses on that, but we'll get into it. And we have some exciting guests here wandering the castle with us. So who's joining us today, Jared?
Yeah, I heard a noise around the corner. I peeked my head around, and I wasn't sure who I was going to run into, but I ran into Justin Martell and Seager Dixon. So if you don't know who these two wonderful fellas are, they are filmmakers and producers who tend to work together. Justin has produced feature films for Trauma, Anchor Bay, The Asylum, and our beloved Full Moon, Screambox, Shudder. It's a really long list of things. He's the executive producer of The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs. I know there's a big fan overlap for that show. And for AMC and Shudder, which Joe Bob is on now also. 6 seasons, been going for a long time. Wow. Also Shakespeare Shitstorm, The Castle Freak remake, and Subspecies 5 Blood Rise, which we haven't covered on an episode proper yet, but we will very soon. Now, Justin, before I introduce you or you come on, there's something else I'm leaving out of your introduction that I will specifically bring up later on. But I also found Seager, and Seager, he's got a crazy resume that's got Trauma, Asylum, and Full Moon on it as well. And he was worked on Last Drive-In also, and the Castle Freak remake and Subspecies 5. As well as things like Shudder's Hellhole and Not the Funeral Home and Vinegar Syndrome 16mm feature 8 Eyes. I did not get paid to say any of that. I promise to all of you. Seager, Justin, how's it going, guys? Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Oh, thank you very much for having us on. It's an honor to be here, just discussing one of our favorite studios and brands, Full Moon.
Well, it might be shocking to listeners, but we did not just run into Seager and Justin. You guys were recommended actually to us by Denise Duff from your work on Subspecies 5. She said, you got to reach out to these two guys. They're super cool. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but are you guys located in Brooklyn or New York as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm sure we've probably been at the same events before and just never realized it.
I'm sure we have. You look very familiar, and Denise is great. And honestly, working with Denise, Honest Hove, and Kevin Spiritus on the Subspecies remake, and of course Ted. But I'm in the cast. I mean, it was so much fun seeing them all get back together and get back into those roles. And I don't know, we had a great time.
Oh, it was a wonderful time. I mean, as soon as they all got into the same country, just like the magic was back on, and everyone's having a good time.
Well, that's not surprising because we talked with them in an interview that we had on our show with them about their time spent making Subspecies 2 and 3 and how close they got over that. And they said that when it was it was rekindled when they got this time to Serbia instead of Romania, but when they got in the country together, like you said, they definitely rekindled their love of one another. The two of them, they you could tell they're best friends. They just gush about each other, and they gushed about you guys too and said that we should reach out to you. So I'm curious, you guys are producers. You work almost entirely, it seems like, in genre stuff. That's stuff that Steve and myself and our listeners are into. So before we start talking about the movie we're going to talk about today, Spellcaster, I want to know a little bit from each of you guys, just kind of what your relationship is with low budget exploitation and genre movies and stuff. I guess, Justin, if you want to go first, just tell us a little bit about, were you a little video store kid? Like, when did you catch the bug?
Yeah, I mean, we probably have, Seager and I think, have a very similar sort of beginning story with this. I mean, yeah, I was a video store kid. Actually, my local video store prided itself on carrying all the Troma releases. So every time Troma would either have a new release or even they'd reissue a back catalog title, my video store always had it. And the Troma team would come to my local video store in Taftville, Connecticut when I was growing up. And so I'd go in and we'd have the Toxic Avenger. And so I remember Sergeant Kabuki Man was there and some Troma. I don't know if Lloyd ever made it to the store. But I remember being very young and going into my local video store and meeting the Troma team, and there would be like Troma Day. And I obviously grew up watching the Toxic Crusaders cartoons. And as a kid, I couldn't understand why my dad wouldn't let me rent the Toxic Avenger movie because because obviously the cover was very similar to the cartoon, but he was going, no, you can't watch the movie itself. And then finally, on my 13th birthday, my father bought me the Toxic Avenger, A Clockwork Orange, and The Omen. And
he was like, now you're a man.
Yes. And I watched all three, and that's where everything kind of kicked off.
Awesome. Seager, what about you?
Much similar to Justin. I guess a little bit different because I'm from a much smaller town, so we didn't really have like the video store. We had a Blockbuster, but to get like the real deep cuts, I had to become an internet kid and scour the internet for sketchy links to .avi copies of movies and stuff. But I grew up listening to heavy metal, and it's just the heavy metal to horror pipeline is half a foot long, so like kind of.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I don't know that we've ever really said that. And like, I liked metal, but I was really like a punk rock kid. And, they're kind of somewhat cousins-ish to one another. Like they either are very much at odds with one another or they're copacetic. Like or you're Motorhead where everyone from both sides loves you.
Right.
But it was the same thing. I felt like with punk and metal, the pipeline to horror just seemed natural. It seemed like I didn't even have to be told. It was just something that I understood. It was like, this is sort of like the film version of the music you like. And especially Troma. I mean, Troma of all those studios is so punk rock in their approach to how they do stuff. And I mean, a lot of, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, my direct pipeline probably to Empire Full Moon is growing up listening to Metallica and their influences from H.P. Lovecraft, and then getting into Lovecraft and then be like, oh, there's movies that they made, let me check all these out, and then finding the Stuart Gordon catalog through that.
Yeah. I think that might be how I kind of got to it too. Reanimator was early in my horror discovery zone, and I was kind of the kid who transitioned to the same way. So it's a pretty clear pipeline. I was curious why you guys wanted to talk about Spellcaster in particular. Is this one you've seen before, or is this a blind flyer you wanted to take?
Well, I hadn't seen it before, but Seager had seen it, and I think you led the charge on that one.
Well, for one, I'm a low-key big Adam Ant fan.
Yeah.
That's like one of my go-to buys at any record store. If I see a copy of, any of the solo stuff or any of the Adam and the Ant stuff or anything, I just buy it.
Yeah.
And I saw him live a few years ago in the city in Manhattan. It was one of the best shows I've seen in a while at the time. He had
awesome.
two different drum players on two different drum kits. It was amazing. But anyways, I did a Spellcaster blind buy from the Vinegar Syndrome sale a few years ago, and because it had Adam Ant on the cover, and checked it out and thought it was great. So then when you gave us the list of the remaining movies, I saw Spellcaster on there. I was like, yep, that's the one. We're going for it.
You bought Spellcaster and I bought Dolls.
Oh, okay. All right. Hard to say who's the winner here, actually.
Which I only bring that up because at least the screenwriter of Dolls, I think, did the first draft of the
Dennis Powley connection.
Yes, the Powley collection did the first draft of the script for. I bring that up because Ed Neha did, I think, the first draft of the script, and then they brought in Dennis Paoli to do the finishing touches on the script for Spellcaster. Dennis being obviously Stuart Gordon's screenwriter and ultimately creative collaborator.
Yeah. And it was cool that was one of those things, like, I didn't really know much about this movie booting it up, and then when it got to that part in the credits, like screenplay by Dennis Paoli, I'm like, oh, okay, we're in good hands here.
Yeah, and you guys didn't know this, but you got equal parts Bunty Bailey
That's true. Yeah, you each got the part of the whole Bunty cycle. Yeah, it's true. One in Dolls and one in Spellcaster.
That's
Let's
right.
talk. Let's get a little bit of the details on
do it.
Spellcaster, the movie, because it's had kind of an interesting production. This was released May 6, 1992. It's directed by Rafal Zelinsky, and it's written by Dennis Paoli, Ed Neha, and Charles Bogle. And it stars Adam Ant, Richard Blade, Gail O'Grady, Harold Pruitt, Bunty Bailey, Kim Johnson Ulrich, Tracy Lind, and Billy Butler. So Spellcaster is unique because it's actually one of a handful of uncompleted Empire movies that actually saw a release. When Empire went under in late 1988, early 1989, a lot of the finished films were sold off to MGM, or a lot of the released films, rather. A lot of the finished films were either shelved or released through a different distributor, and most of the unfinished films were just canned. I think this one, they had all the principal footage of it ready to go. They just kind of needed to give it an edit and a polish and everything like that. But even still, it took 5 years for this movie to actually come out. Oh, excuse me. Actually, no, it took 6 years. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was miscounting. Because this was shot back in 1986. Kind of during Empire's heyday. This is when they had a budget and when they had stars interested in starring in their films. And this wound up shooting in Rome and being one of the first, if not the first movie shot in Charles Band's castle that he had just recently purchased, the Castello dei Giovi, the set of many a Full Moon and an Empire film, until he finally sold it in, I think, 2010 or something like that. He held on to it for a long time. So yeah, like most Empire productions, this was meant to be a quick turnaround, but the film faced some delays, which was unfortunate because it was around that time the studio started to struggle to fund their movies. Spellcaster turned to be a bit of a tricky prospect too, because a lot of their marketing was banking on the current popularity of Adam Ant. So I just want to take a quick Adam Ant corner on this because he's sort of the selling point of this movie. He was born Stuart Leslie Goddard, and he's a British new wave musician. He scored a string of huge hits in the UK, and then a couple that broke over to the United States. The aforementioned Goody Goody Two Shoes was his biggest hit over here. I think that peaked at like number 15 on the charts, but he had number one hits in Australia and the UK, like all throughout the early 80s. And this was with both his band Adam and the Ants and his solo act, which is just Adam Ant. So, but around 1985, he was finding the touring life pretty stressful, and so he decided to step away from his music to focus on acting. And that didn't really materialize in too much. He booked a couple of appearances on TV and a few small film roles, including a memorable appearance in the very first John McTiernan film, which is a really bad, like, psychic punker, weird, trippy movie called Nomads with Pierce Brosnan playing a Frenchman. Pretty wild movie, definitely worth checking out, but not very good. And he's kind of like the main thug in that. So they kind of paint him up to be all ghostly and intimidating. But even still, it's not screaming like, okay, Adam Ant is a movie star just yet. So this movie was going to be his biggest film role to date. It was going to be, he's playing the villain character in this like big horror film. And so it looked like that was going to be a good thing, but they were kind of on a ticking clock because I hate to like commodify it even this way, but like Adam Ant's relevance on the pop charts was kind of dipping already by 1986. Like it's a time when there's a lot of fast turnover and people are sort of slavish to what's going on in the Billboard charts. So if you're not charting right now, people are not really paying attention to you. And his relevance as a musician was kind of waning in the United States. So he didn't quite have the name recognition in 1986 that he did in 1982. And that only compounded things when this movie was pushed all the way to 1992, when he was fully kind of in Where Are They Now territory. And for the record, I am also an Adam Ant fan. I don't mean to slog off on him. We have like 4 or 5 of his albums. I did not realize my girlfriend is like a huge Adam Ant fan. We have several of his vinyl. But
I can picture, even without looking at it, I can picture the cover of that Kings of the Wild Frontier record.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
I remember that one from when I was a kid.
Well, that whole album front to back is a banger.
Hey, he has a cool sound. I mean, he like you said, Seeger, he is still touring today. He's still like doing his music again and puts on a pretty kick-ass show from what I understand. So yeah, he's still out there. But that was kind of the awkward position they were in with this movie at the time. So this film was directed by Rafal Zelinsky, who's a Canadian filmmaker, a favorite of Roger Corman. He's probably best known, I would say, for the 1-2 punch of Screwballs and Loose Screws. You know, the Screwballs dyad, the duology, if you will, the seminal work of early 80s body comedies. Yeah, he doesn't have, if he didn't have much genre pedigree, he at least got a little boost from Dennis Paoli and Ed Neha of Reanimator fame, as we mentioned. And so they came in and kind of did a polish up on the script. And so we also, in addition to Adam Ant, this movie also has a solid cast with Bunty Bailey, who we mentioned, returning from Dolls. We have future NYPD Blue star Gail O'Grady as kind of the heroine. And British DJ Richard Blade is rounding out the cast. I guess he was like a big drive time DJ in LA at the time. So I think he was a bit of a get, but like, honestly, I don't know much about West Coast DJs from 1986.
So the first thing that jumped in my mind when I saw Richard Blade in this movie is because his delivery and his introduction into the movie is really similar to when he plays like the host of a dance TV in the movie Girls Just Want to Have Fun.
Oh, is that him?
Which is that Sarah Jessica Parker and Helen Hunt movie that came out right after Trancers. Helen Hunt of Trancers.
Yes.
And it's that's his persona. And yeah, I didn't know much about him as I actually didn't realize he was a real person. I thought at the time, having seen Girls Just Want to Have Fun a handful of times, I thought he was just an actor. And then I realized maybe 10 years ago. So my parents, every time that my parents live in the Hudson Valley and I take the Metro North train to go see them. And every time they pick me up from the train station, they have the first wave Sirius XM station on. And it's Richard Blade hosting the station all the time.
Really?
And so his voice, I have heard so many times in my life because I associate with every single time over the last like decade that my parents have picked me up from the train station. I hear Richard Blade. So I have a little soft spot for him in this movie. And I think for somebody who is a VJ and a DJ, I mean, he's a DJ in real life, playing a VJ here, playing a VJ in Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Yeah. I think he does a decent enough job.
I think he does well. You know, I have some issues with this movie, but overall, I do think it's very fun. I think I was struggling in the first half. Like I wrote in my notes, I'm like, all right, I think this script is a comedy. I think Dennis Paoli, Charles Bogle, Ed Neha, I think they wrote a comedy. And it wasn't until about midway through that I was sure that it was a comedy, like that I showed that everyone was on that same page. You know, I'm like, I don't know that Rafal Zelinsky is directing a comedy here. And then I got about midway through and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, these performances are so fever pitched, like everything's kind of heightened and goofy. I think they know what kind of movie they're making, and they are trying to make it silly and intentionally funny.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I will come right out and say, and I mean, Seager and Justin chose this movie, so obviously there was some, admiration for it. In Empire of the Bees, in Dave J's book, he does not like this movie.
Interesting.
He speaks really poorly of it. And I found, it's funny, with It Came from the Video Aisle and now with Empire of the Bees, I find myself being like, these books are a great reference. These books are giving me a lot of contextual information. But I do find myself sometimes at odds with David J's opinion on some of the movies. I do feel like he's very forgiving of some that I think are middle of the road. And then there's ones like this, which I feel like this is just a dumb, fun movie.
Yeah.
And he's really nitpicky about it and speaks really negatively about it, which was surprising. And I think it's just kind of odd because I feel like I find this type of movie to be one that to be kind of hard to have such outwardly negative feelings towards. Like, I feel like you can watch this and be like, okay, this is kind of Much Ado About Nothing. It's kind of like a 10 Little Indians, Agatha Christie setup here. Sprinkle in a little kind of Willy Wonka in here also.
Yeah, a little bit.
And it's like, okay, it is what it is. I get it. Is it like supremely entertaining from frame one to the end? Maybe not, but I think there's a lot to like here. And so
No, it's
oh, go ahead.
it's serviceable, and I mean, for me personally, I'm just a big fan of. I'm a fan of crazy movies where you have something that's like a haunted house, or in this case, a castle.
Yeah.
That just serves like people going through it, and then we are just getting to one crazy special effects set piece.
It's not a plot movie.
Yes.
It's a premise movie.
Yeah.
These characters, there's a bunch of rooms. In every room, something happens in. If you're expecting character development, you're not really going to get it. If you're expecting a big twist and turn, you're not going to get it until the very, very end because they only had one day to shoot with Adam Ant.
And
hey, you see this guy? You might not know this about this guy, but he's Big Fat Pig.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's basically the character development here.
Punchline, move on. Set up, punchline, move on.
Yeah, and it's like, so talked about that we work on the show The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs. And for me, like, my favorite episodes of the show that we've done are these types of movies. Like, for me, the most fun episodes are Spookies, your Demon Wins, and I think Spellcaster also falls very much, into that realm. We've got all the classic haunted house, gags, and it's evocative of, House, Spookies, Amityville 2 and 3. We've got medieval furniture and gargoyles coming to life, groping a woman and while biting her neck at the same time. Burial ground style zombies in the basement, which makes sense because it's shot in Italy, so we get some Italian style zombies thrown in there. We've got a rapey Italian guy plummeting to his death from the turret. Fat guy turns into a pig. Demon coming out of the painting. Whatever that choking snake thing was. We get some substitutionary locomotion with the night coming to life, and then whatever leftover monster from the beyond, from beyond. That
I was going to say that's a very from beyond creature design.
Yeah, Seager pointed that out.
That was straight from the workshop. They're like, does this still work? Yeah, let's use it.
Yeah.
So, 100%.
So for me, I love these types of movies anyway. Like, I've just, it's just a thing to get us to one crazy special effects thing to another. And you made the Willy Wonka comparison. Seager made the Willy Wonka comparison. And then I looked at the dates and I was seeing, shot in 86, which is also the same year Labyrinth came out.
Yeah,
true.
I think there are some Labyrinth elements here. We have a pop star in it. In Labyrinth, David Bowie is watching Jennifer Connelly through that orb or something that he has as he kind of manipulates the situation as she's navigating the labyrinth. And we have something kind of similar here. I mean, in Labyrinth, she's trying to get her brother back, who's a baby. But in Spellcaster, the lead, I think it's Jackie, right? Mm-hmm. She gets her brother back and her friends, at the end. And so I don't know. I saw some Labyrinth elements here.
I feel like
That's
I need to hand over my 80s kid card for not making that connection myself.
Yeah, I didn't clock it either because they are very different movies in their execution, but absolutely having like a British pop star like waving his hands over a crystal ball like and manipulating situations is 100%.
See, the problem is this, that I can whittle it down to one thing. The problem is that Adam Ant was not wearing a cod piece.
He was not.
If he had one on, then I would have made the connection.
Well, maybe they did. I don't know. The movie shot a little weird. I think that's kind of one of my problems. I think the movie could have benefited from a bit of a surer hand behind the camera because the film is edited in such a strange way where like all the scares are revealed like several seconds before the scare actually happens. And I think it's just weird framing, weird cutting, something's going on. And they are working in a real castle, but they light it and arrange it to make it look like it's a set of a castle. And I'm just like, you are really not using this castle to its full potential. Other big problem, and this is a rude one to kind of point out, but I felt like all of the characters looked alike, and I was having a real hard time telling what was happening to whom at a given point. I don't know if anyone else struggled with that problem. It was a lot of very identical looking blonde women.
I absolutely struggled with that problem, and I had to. I went online and read the synopsis. After watching the movie, I went and read the synopsis just to
make sure which character.
Yeah,
I had to do that too.
But yeah, I mean, it was, it's a lot of fun, and these are just, I love these types of movies. You know, it's just we don't really need much else other than a cool location and some awesome special effects set pieces and somebody cool like Adam Ant to drive the whole thing along, and young people and special effects.
I mean, I will say Adam Ant is he's, you know, if you're real excited about that element of this movie, he is only in, I would say, the final 5 minutes, something like that. Like, he pops up extremely late. I think he's good. I think he's having fun. I think he is, he's bringing the camp to this villain. He's surprisingly like clean cut when we meet him. He just looks like a normal dude in a coffee shop. You know, I was expecting something very dramatic and very kind of glam, but there's something funny about how dressed down and normal he is when we first meet him. And then of course he reveals himself to be a demonic creature, but he's very genteel and kind of manipulative without seeming like very forceful or chaotic. He's just
you're totally right.
He's a nice guy. He showed up. Yeah,
I was surprised by the way he looked too. Again, to reference it, I was expecting the Kings of the Wild Frontier cover when they did a face reveal of him, and he doesn't look like that at all.
Even if you look at the VHS cover art, he looks so much more dramatic on that than he does in the movie. Like, he's very like, you know, businesslike in the film, but I think he's good.
Yeah, this movie, Justin, you made a good point, which is like, I had the same thought watching it. Is like, I like this kind of movie. And so when you were talking before about movies, the episodes of The Last Drive-In that you like, it made me think of a few months back, Steve and I were a guest on another podcast talking about Black Roses.
Yeah.
And so like Black Roses, I mean, that doesn't have a real life rock star in it. But I mean,
should, damn it. That guy deserved a crossover after that movie. I'm going to continue beating the drum for Black Roses. That movie rules.
Right. But it's also like, I guess I wouldn't know this because I've never like been on set or saw how things run, but I have to feel like there's, for Joe Bob too, like less pressure to do your drive-in totals and to have like really insightful things to say, because if it's a bigger movie, I feel like people expect you got to have like a big guest to interview, you got to do this. But if you're just talking about Black Roses, like I feel like you can have some fun with it and just point out how just goofy a lot of it is. And so like yeah, when you said that those end up being some of the fun episodes, I mean, I feel like those are the ones that, like, if I pop Shudder on and I want to watch Last Drive-In, those are the ones that I find. Like, you named Spookies, you named, Demon Wind was one I remember watching that episode for. Hugh the Winged Serpent.
I love
just an absolutely amazing movie that I feel like Steve and I talk about somehow in every episode.
I will always bring up Q whenever I can.
Yeah, and I feel like the fans of the show too. I mean, obviously, I think everyone likes it when we do a Walking Dead special or we do a bigger title and have a big guest on. But I think really the bread and butter of the show and what people really want to see is Joe Bob just researching and diving into some of these deep cuts and some of these I mean. It's funny. I think we were talking the other day. Everything's an underappreciated gem, or everything's underrated. But at a certain point, those are the types of movies that we like to get into, or at least re-examining things that you would otherwise just gloss over or just dismiss as ridiculous. To go deep on a movie like Spookies, to go deep on something like Blood Harvest, that's where we really and nerd out about these things, and we really like to do that.
You are aware what show you're on, right?
Oh yes, that's very much what we do. No, that's very much what we do. I mean, I'm of the personal philosophy that every single movie has something interesting to talk about. I've discovered that just the years of doing podcasts. It's like, you know what?
Even Evil Bong.
There's something that makes every movie unique and worth kind of exploring. And I think this one is definitely a fascinating movie. And I think it's really fun. Like, had this had a bit of a more confident director, I guess, or more of a production time, less of a troubled production time, I think this could have kind of like a fun sort of magical Coen Brothers sort of energy to it. Like, everybody's ramped up a little bit. Everybody's a little manic. And we mentioned the Agatha Christie thing. This is one of my favorite tropes in all of fiction. It's just a bunch of strangers being summoned to a house for mysterious reasons. Like, give me that like straight into my veins every time. I love that premise. So I'm already in from moment one. Like, you tell me a bunch of weirdos are coming to this house to look for a treasure. I'm so down with that. And you can tighten it up. And I think make that more of an explicit homage, give it kind of a wackier bent to it, and then add the magic, of course. And I think you have a really fun movie here. And the movie that exists is a lot of fun too. It's just it's one of those films that you see the potential for a polish up to make it like a really cool little cult film.
Yeah, and you mentioned a more confident director, but I don't know. Maybe I'm not sure if that's it.
That may not be the issue. Yeah.
Well, what it is though is that you mentioned that there are elements of this film that feel like a comedy, and if you go and look at the director's filmography, his movies prior to this are sexy comedies. We have the Screwball series, Valet Girls, and State Park, aka Heavy Metal Summer, and he goes from those movies into doing this. So you probably have a lot of that style that carried over, and that's why it can be a little confusing. Is it a comedy film? Is it a horror film? Is it a horror comedy? It doesn't really feel like any of those things. Right?
Well, even think about at the time of its release, like, weren't really making fun, sexy comedies in '92. So I'm sure the release and the rollout of like, all right, what is this movie? What are we doing? And that's how you get the Adam Ant on the cover with the crystal ball. It's just like, oh, this is like a weird, spooky movie. It's not really, but I'm sure if it was released in, 86, 87, it would be a little bit more, sexy comedy poster and kind of advertisement than like a Haunted Mansion movie.
Yeah, I want some cover art of Adam Ant's bra getting pulled. I think that would sell this movie a lot more for me.
Like the Copper Tone ad, but with Adam Ant in it.
Yeah. Isn't that am I thinking of the right ones? The Screwballs movies, isn't the cover art like a woman running away as somebody's trying to pull her bra off?
I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, okay, I just had to look it up. Wow. Okay. The cover art says 4 stars, Hall of Fame nudity. That is an interesting. That's from who's that? Oh, Manola Dargis. What? No, I'm kidding.
Well, see, the funny thing though, Steve, is you say that, and some of the criticism that I saw in this movie, and just like after I watched it, I was like, all right, let me kind of explore a little bit. Let me look it through IMDb, read some IMDb reviews too, just to kind of get perception for like audience scores and things on this movie also. And like a lot of the criticism people have are like outwardly just like, there was opportunity for a lot of nudity in this movie and it's not there. And it's like, that's literally, that's their complaint. And I mean, I guess like if you're in the market for, that's what you were looking for, and what Empire and Full Moon were putting out, and you would expect, nudity in a Charles Band movie. So that's fair to expect it. That is something you could be a little annoyed about. Maybe Raphael Zelinsky was annoyed about that too, because I know after this movie he started making like straight to video and straight to cable like erotic thrillers with Lorenzo Lamas. And C. Thomas Howell, as in one of them as like an older man with a young girl, Lolita style, who comes into his life and causes chaos. I don't remember the name of it, but I know those are some of the people he worked with and movies he made. But Seager, you made a point that I want to kind of piggyback off of a little bit, which is that the rolling out of the release of this movie was probably strained, to say the least, and odd. And it's because another thing I like about it is because of its troubled production and because of it when it actually came out, not only is it kind of like a fun, goofy, silly movie that was almost lost to time, but it was released and it's kind of a relic because
for sure
it's like lost to time. Because think about, like Steve was mentioning, Adam Ant's career at that point. I mean, just think about in 1986 when this was being filmed, like the sort of the national pop culture in the country at that time. And Adam Ant, maybe he wasn't lighting up the charts anymore, but he was still a name people recognized. But in 1986, I mean, you have Bunty Bailey 1 year removed from the Take On Me video.
Right.
You have, like they even have the, Richard Blade in the movie, and you have this fake, I love the fake music video intro to the movie for the credit sequence. Like that hooked me immediately. But it's like
Nina Hagen kind of character.
Yeah. And in 1988, then when they were wrapping production on this, you had the landscape was shifting a little bit, and you had really hair metal was kind of the biggest thing at the time. And so this is kind of the music and stuff, and this would already be sort of considered uncool. But then this thing doesn't actually really see the light of day and release until May of 1992. Like,
It's a different
Nevermind has
really.
come out.
Yeah.
10 has come out. Super Unknown has come out. Like, sure, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 from Guns N' Roses and Metallica's Black Album and Countdown to Extinction by Megadeth. Like, those are huge sellers at that time also.
Yeah.
So like those metal albums are selling a ton of copies, but we had gone grunge at this point, and not everything, it seems like, from Nevermind onward is such a noticeable reaction to the 80s and rebellion against the 80s
Mhm.
Right.
that for this movie to then actually get a release at that time is kind of mind-boggling, because it's like,
Right.
who would have been in the market for it then? Like, I'm not saying this isn't a releasable movie. I'm not saying this should have been shelved.
Yeah.
I'm glad it exists and I'm glad that we get to watch it. But knowing in hindsight now that the time it took for it to actually come out, like in 1992, like, was there an audience for this anymore?
Yeah.
It's just such a
Well-
weirdly placed thing.
Well, having done some low budget films and having had discussions about possibly not releasing certain films with my CPA or our
Mhm.
CPA, I can tell you that you can't claim a movie as a loss if you don't release it.
Okay.
I'm gonna throw that out there.
Yeah. All right. All right.
We're not saying that was the reason this was
I'm not
released,
saying
but
that
we're
was
not
the
ruling
reason.
it out.
I'm just saying, you can't claim it as a loss if you don't release it. So I don't
Right.
know. That comes to mind. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why they either didn't shelve it and decided to put it out later. That could have been a business decision.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised at all. But I agree. It does feel kind of like opening a time capsule from 1986, like in the early 90s. It feels so very rooted in that time and that aesthetic. Like it's basically the Total Eclipse of the Heart video a lot of the time, and it's just like, this is a lot of blowing scarves and empty castles. And like it has such an 80s aesthetic that it is funny to think it's getting released in 1980 or 1992. Yeah.
But we talked about Bunty Bailey from the Take On Me video. We talked about her in Dolls. Let's talk about her in this movie. I think she's great.
Spoiled rock star, always a
Yeah.
fun character to play, and like we haven't really gone into the premise too much of this movie, but it is a bunch of random people were summoned to a castle with the promise of winning a prize and spending a night with a rock star, and Bunty Bailey is the rock star in question. And of course, they're all being manipulated by a magical man with an old-timey crystal ball, which is such a funny choice. Like that is such like hoary old tropes by 1986 that it's so funny that they're relying so heavily on a crystal ball.
Mhm.
Well, I love the scene where she licks up her vodka off the floor. I thought that was a nice touch.
That was almost my intro. I was going to say, I'm one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, currently licking his vodka off the floor.
But like our listeners don't need to like hear you explicitly say that. They know, it's understood that that's what you're doing most of the time.
If it's a day that ends in Y, you can find me licking vodka off the floor.
Tastes
Well,
better.
you're in good company then. Us and Bunty Bailey.
Yeah, I don't know. And it does become just kind of that horror movie structure of, a person discovers something, wanders off, gets killed. Person discovers something, wanders off, gets killed. But it always stays fun. It's really cheap looking, but it is really distinctive and funny. I think the lion chair coming to life and biting the crap out of the lady is still my favorite kill, just for sheer goofiness and for the stiffness of the animatronic as the little chair is like bending over to bite her. It's really funny, and it's really kind of a fun little winky thing to have.
Yeah, it was something that I didn't really expect when I was watching the movie that Tracy Lind playing Yvette, this French woman, was going to get the full Dana Barrett on that chair, but she does, and she gets it grabbed by a bunch of arms and bit by the chair. And Tracy Lind is an interesting person too, because she's playing this French woman Yvette here, and she would retire from acting pretty shortly after this, and she's kind of most notable for being linked to Dode Fayed, the guy who was killed in the car with Princess Diana.
Oh, weird.
Like Yeah, she was, I don't know if she was married to him or in a relationship with him, but she was a model and then she acted for a little while. And I feel like that was sort of, yeah, like it's a weird connection outside of this film. And I don't really know to what extent, because I was laughing because there's another character in the movie who's she's kind of played to be like British aristocracy,
Yeah.
and
Awesome.
that character talks about going hunting with Fergie, and I was like, oh, they're making another connection to, I think it's Dale Wyatt, maybe was the name of that actress, and
Oh yeah.
yeah, and they're making another connection sort of to like the royal family. It was just odd. It was a kind of a 6 degrees of separation thing there. My
Yeah.
brain kind of went on a little tangent while I was watching.
Yeah, no, it was. I don't know. I don't have too much more to say about Spellcaster. Honestly, I had a good time with it. I think it really kind of epitomizes the point I've been making about Full Moon versus like Trauma or Canon Films or any of these other like low budget distributors. Is that Full Moon and Empire Films always feel incredibly well meaning. Whereas Trauma likes to sometimes push your buttons and like intentionally get in your face or make you uncomfortable or do something like that. I feel like Full Moon movies are always kind of weirdly wholesome, and Empire
We
in
don't
particular-
have a full moon terror firmer
we don't. No, we don't. Or a Poultrygeist, you know.
Well, I think
or
the closest-
Shakespeare shitstorm. And
I
I
think
just
the closest
I
you
tipped
get
an imaginary hat to Seager.
I think the closest you get to Full Moon Terror Firmer is The Dead Hate the Living, which we
Yeah.
talked about previously. But yeah, you know, that is, I've always said, and obviously both of us having worked for both Lloyd Kaufman and Charles Band,
Yeah.
is that Lloyd has always been an artist first over a businessman. So Lloyd will make the movie that he wants to make. If they can sell it, great. If they don't, he's willing to accept the loss because he still made the film, is that the film reflects his vision. Whereas I feel like Charles Band and Full Moon, it's been, you know, he's been a little bit more business minded.
Yeah.
First and foremost. And I think that is the fundamental difference between the two. I'm not saying that Full Moon movies aren't artful, and you know, but I think that that's the thing, is that, you know, Charlie's always been a businessman first. Lloyd has always been an artist first and foremost, and I think that's kind of the fundamental difference between the two.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so I'll ask you, Justin, because I've never been in the same room as Charles Band. I've been in the same room as Lloyd Kaufman. I've shaken his hand once and said hello to him. Do they, maybe you'll know, like, what is their attitude towards one another? Like, are they respectful to one another? Do they like appreciate one another? Or I kind of imagine like they walk in the same room at like a convention and they kind of just like walk like two UFC fighters up to each other before like for the weigh-in.
No, you know what? They've always been friendly, and again, I think they sort of recognize each other as sort of two different sides of the same coin, and respect each other accordingly. I've seen them in the same room together. When, you know, when the American film market was more of a film market and there was more business to be done there, I used to always go to the Trauma booth, you know, when I worked there, and, you know, Charlie would always pop his head in, or Lloyd and Charlie might set a lunch and just, you know, kind of talk about sort of just the market for independent films in general at the time, because they were both, you know, selling similar type of films and everything. So there's just some mutual and shared business interest there that I know that they would keep in touch on. So yeah, definitely mutual respect.
Yeah, I think at this point, I mean, they both recognize that, you know, they're kind of like the last ones still doing it from that era, and just the fact that they're still able to do it for them, I think tickles both of them in probably different ways, but they both kind of make that acknowledgement of each other for sure.
Absolutely. That's a great point. They both have been able to recognize trends that are upcoming, because I feel like both Charlie with Empire and also Trauma were some of the first to embrace home video and do really well, you know, selling the films on home video to video stores when the major studios thought that home video was going to just be a trend or fad. And they've also been done really well in reinventing themselves as the market has continued to change over the years. So I think they're both similar in that sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that's cool to hear. Yeah, I love the idea that these two guys are just getting to do their thing still. Like so many others have stopped trying with this genre, and these guys are just plugging away so much. And I think that's so cool.
And even some of it, I would be remiss if we didn't bring up Roger Corman.
Yeah.
You know, we had, I think we had sort of his last big interview on our like live Jamboree special that we did this summer.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, I know up to the end when we interviewed him, he was saying that he had 4 more movies that he still wanted to do. So he was even still talking about, you know, doing stuff.
I mean, I always say, like, if you've liked a movie in the last 60 years, you have Roger Corman to thank at some stage of that development. Like, his tendrils extend so far throughout Hollywood that, like, we're still feeling the repercussions of that. And people don't really give him proper credit for how much he actually did and how many kind of connections that he made.
Well, I think it's a good thing to talk about in talking like about a movie like Spellcaster, is that it's good to highlight the importance of these kinds of producers and genre filmmakers, because I think it was Justin earlier who said like the studio system as a whole is the major studio system is very different. And I think like when Steve and I started doing the show, we knew what we were getting into in terms of like, all right, we're going to do all of Full Moon, we're going to do all of Empire, we're going to do even the old Charles Band productions. And I think for our first couple of episodes, I think we tried to stay a little bit at arm's length. Like, I think we were a little bit more like nitpicky, a little bit more analytical, critical about aspects of the movies. And as we've done a lot more episodes and watched a lot more of these movies, some of them first time watches, some of them revisits of things we haven't seen in a while, and had conversations with people, you know, who've worked for Full Moon or similar companies, or who worked, you know, on the crew of this certain movie, or the effects artists and stuff like that. It really just kind of, I don't know, it sort of just has been reinforcing the message of that, like, it's sort of a minor miracle that any movie gets made ever.
Yeah, it really is.
Sure. I mean,
and so, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna jump in, you know, talking about, you know, as Spellcaster being a semi-failed movie or whatever, but also going back to these guys, you know, seeing the trends and seeing the future. If you look at it, I mean, Spellcaster is the prototype for so many Full Moon movies.
Yeah.
We have a castle in Italy. Let's get a crew over there. I mean, how many movies did he shoot in that castle? And this is the first one. So even as, you know, Empire is coming down, he's looking forward to the future with these, you know, these castle movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Starts off with Bunty Bailey shooting a music video and eventually finds its way to Giorgio the Freak biting a vagina off.
Yeah, exactly.
That's an even shorter pipeline than the metal to horror pipeline.
Yeah.
That's even shorter. Yeah.
Speaking of pipelines attached to cars, that was a good segue.
That was beautiful.
You mentioned before that Billy Butler is in this movie, and he's a frequent collaborator on a ton of Charles Band and Full Moon stuff. And you mentioned before sort of the editing being a little bit confusing at times, and maybe like a not entirely sure-footed director handling some of the material, how to introduce things. The scene with Billy Butler in it comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And it's Adamant, presumably up from in a high window, controlling 2 people who are stuck in a car because they're on their way to get an HD camera. And then, you know, we're following these characters. It's almost like, it reminded me of a couple of things. One, it was like when we get the Tony Goldwyn and Tom McLaughlin's wife in Jason Lives, where they're just the 2 people who Jason jumps out in front of their car for no reason and kills the 2 of them. Like they're not going to meet the other characters. They're not doing anything. But it also was like, it's like you're following the people on their way to the castle, and it's like these 2 people are not there, and then they're in a scene together, which we're watching Spellcaster, and then all of a sudden this scene happens, and it's like the last scene from The Mechanic. Where all of a sudden they're in a car, and it's like, I don't know. Are you guys familiar with The Mechanic, the Charles Bronson movie?
I don't think I've seen it.
But yeah.
So it's got a hilarious final scene, which is like he's Jan Michael Vincent's mentor, and then Jan Michael Vincent double crosses him and poisons him. But Charles Bronson knew that it was going to happen, so he rigged the car that Jan Michael Vincent was going to escape in. And so he opens the door and he sees a note taped to the dashboard, and it's like, "Hey, Steve, if you're reading this note, it means that you've triggered this whatever that I have in this car. End of game." Boom. And then the car blows up. And then it
Sounds
goes
great.
immediately to credits. Like it's so hilarious. And that's why this was such a jarring scene. I was like, wow, like I did not see that coming. So yeah, I think maybe that's again edited into the movie in kind of an odd spot, just to show us that Adam Ant's character, which also is credited as Diablo, but it sounds like they're saying Diabli every time, which I don't know if that was, I mean, I know like I can sometimes be the plural of O's, but there's only one of him. So I didn't really know what to make of that. But I think that scene exists only really to show us that he is quite nefarious and that there's going to be some.
And I don't speak Italian, but I was hearing Diavoli, which I know is a Italian name. So maybe, and it sounds like devil. So it could
but in
be
the
like
credits, it
alias.
says Adam Ant as Diablo.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
And so that's why I was a little taken aback by that.
No. Either way, he's got a cool ass name. It's either Diavoli or it's Diablo. And either way, I don't mess with that guy. Or it's Adam Ant, which is an even more intimidating name. They can lift 10,000 times their strength. Well, I think that's all I've got to say about Spellcaster. Thank you guys so much for being here for this episode. It's a very fun, silly movie that I enjoyed. Oh, do you have one? Yeah.
I have something, because I didn't do this during the introduction because I wanted to devote 2 minutes to it.
Okay.
So Justin, in addition to the stuff I talked about in your introduction and all this amazing stuff that you've done, you wrote a book. And that book is the official biography of the 60s entertainer Tiny Tim.
That's
right. Oh my God.
And the book is called Eternal Troubadour, The Improbable Life of Tiny Tim. And it was based off of a documentary and narrated by Weird Al. So tell us a little bit about this.
It was the opposite. We did. I wrote the book and then we did the documentary narrated by.
My mistake.
Yeah, I saw Tiny Tim when I was about 7 years old at a Halloween theme park in Massachusetts called Spooky World. And it was amazing. Actually, like all roads in my life lead to Spooky World, because there was a Troma was there. Lloyd Kaufman was there. When you went into the haunted hayride, there was a big sign that said, "Welcome to Tromaville." And while you were waiting in line for the haunted hayride, they had celebrities that would come out, and so they would have Bobby Boris Pickett doing the Monster Mash. You'd have Tiny Tim come out and do his thing. And I just remember seeing him live and being like totally entranced by this strange character with the long hair and the ukulele and everything. And I was reintroduced to his music in high school and kind of became obsessive, because to me, I thought that this was one of the greatest entertainers of all time. And then I very quickly realized that I was one of the few people who viewed him that way. Mm-hmm. And so, and I thought that it was a real injustice, kind of going back and re-examining his career and listening to his albums and watching his television appearances and going back and reading media coverage of him at the time that he was, during the height of his fame in the late 60s. And I thought it was a real injustice that he was kind of looked at as a kind of a joke or a footnote in the annals of popular culture. So I wanted to write a book that kind of corrected that. And I think that I was able to kind of reclaim history a little bit and sort of refocus how we look at his career and his influence on pop culture, thereafter. I mean, he's kind of the first sort of gothic, white-faced, long-haired rock star era entertainer. Because if you look at Tiny Tim, there's nothing like that before Tiny Tim. And then afterwards, you get Kiss and Alice Cooper, and to Boy George, and I even draw the line up to Rob Zombie, Marilyn Manson, Lady Gaga today. Adam Ant, sure.
Yeah.
And those were the points that I wanted to make in the book, and that based on the feedback they got from it, I think I was successful in doing that, not to toot my own horn, but
that's such an amazingly niche thing that it's such a perfect fit for what you guys do for a living, for what we're doing on the show. Like, it's just the perfect subject for that. And so, and I saw you post something about it a while back, and I kind of double taked when I saw the post, and I went, "Whoa, wait a minute, really?"
Well,
like,
well, the funny thing is, for the last drive-in, we did the Blood Harvest episode, which of course is the horror movie that he starred in, directed by Bill Rebane in 1987. And more people recognize me as being the Tiny Tim expert from the Blood Harvest episode, and have no idea that I'm one of the producers of the show. So I'll get emails or I'll get messages from people. Loved you as the Tiny Tim expert on the show.
Yeah,
and
you've got to
barely correct them. I just say, "Yep, that's my involvement."
Yeah, you're Tiny Tim expert. You've got a little plaque next to Felissa Rose and her mangled dick expert.
Yes,
from the. And since you were so successful with the book, which is amazing, Seager, I have to ask you, what novelty singer have you written a book about?
Oh God, yes, but I should probably write a book about Adamant after.
This is what I was leading into. I was hoping that the seed for that would be planted here. But thank you guys so much for joining us. So where can people find you if they want to keep up with the stuff you're producing and your social media and just know in general what you guys are up to?
Well, let's see. I mean, just some general stuff that's coming out. I mean, obviously, the last drive-in you can find on Shudder and also AMC Plus. We also have a new film that we did with the Addams Family that's premiering at Fantasia. It's called Hellhole. We shot it in Serbia last year, and it's premiering at Fantasia and will drop on Shudder soon thereafter. What else do we have coming up? Our film Black and Susan. We have our 16 millimeter co-production that we did with Vinegar Syndrome, 8 Eyes, directed by Austin Jennings, who directs The Last Drive-In, also shot in Serbia. And that will be out on a Blu-ray in July from Vinegar Syndrome. And I'm also happy to say, coming up, also premiering at Fantasia, we have Black Eyed Susan, which is the new film from Scooter McCrae, which we shot last summer on 16 millimeter in Brooklyn. Scooter McCrae, of course, who did Shatter Dead and 16 Tongues. This was kind of the big return and third feature from Scooter McCrae. So it's been really cool to be part of his comeback in a sense. And those are some of the stuff we have coming up. And you can just find us on Instagram. I'm at Justin Martell. I think he's at Flock of Seagers.
If I don't accept your request, I'm sorry.
I'm public. He's not.
That's fair.
And that's it. That's how you can find us. So thank you very much for having us on, and we'd be happy to come on anytime and talk about any crazy movie you want.
We would love it. It's amazing. And I just want you to know I have immediately started downloading the audiobook of Eternal Troubadour, written performed by Tim Heidecker. So
yeah,
that's amazing.
He hated doing it, but that's a story for another time. But he did a very good job. I want to say he did a great job, but I think he found the process a little taxing. I think when he realized that, I know we're running out of time, but it's one of those things where I think he thought the Tiny Tim persona was like a clever character. Like he has all these characters that he does. And I think I think he was really disappointed to find that Tiny Tim was like just actually like that. And in fact, even weirder. But it was a fun process. And I think you did a good job. And thank you very much for downloading it.
I'm excited to listen to it. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, you know where to find Seager and Justin. You also know where to find us. And if you like what we do on the show, then you can jump on to Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Drop us a quick 5-star rating or review if you feel so inclined. You can follow us on Instagram at puppetmasters_castle freaks. You can follow me at Giallo_Jerry or Steve at Minotaur Matador. We're also on X and Threads and Blue Sky and YouTube and any social media. So please check us out if you want to keep up with what we're doing. And if you just recently found the show and you've been enjoying the couple of episodes that you've dove into, tell a friend and spread the word. Let them know that the show is out there so we can help it grow and reach a wider audience. But we're not the only show that Steve hopes will also reach a wider audience. Steve, what else have you got going on?
I also have a show called Cinema Arcade. That's cinema and arcade mashed together. Each week we are watching a movie and then playing the game based on that movie. We've got this big old random spreadsheet. We're going through a lot of them, and we're having a great time doing it. We are so far ahead on this show that I'm not sure exactly where we are with Cinema Arcade at this point, but I'm about to record an episode on the movie Small Soldiers. We've got episodes coming up on Friday the 13th and Surf Ninjas and just a bunch of really weird stuff. Just did one on Riddick. If you want to check out that amazing Riddick game for the Xbox, it's so much fun. So lots of fun stuff. So definitely check that out. And be sure to come back and see us next week. We have a very fun movie to talk about. It is a 1985 World War II sci-fi adventure called Zone Troopers. That's right. A bunch of soldiers walk off of the set of Trancers and walk into an Italian countryside where they meet a friendly alien. And it's such a fun movie. We have great guests to talk about that with, and it's going to be a good time.
Yeah. So thank you once again to Justin and Seager for taking the time. Definitely check out all of their amazing work and maybe download Justin's audiobook as well. And we will see you guys next time for Zone Troopers. So long.